So I have a question. Perhaps it's a kind of a more personal question, because I just admire the work you both do, and in some ways I see myself as that type of scholar, or what I hope to be. So I'm curious about just your personal journey. And sometimes the academy is such a large gap and disconnect between what we call the academy and what we say is happening on the ground. The academy just, it feels so detached. And so as a practical theologians, as scholars, I just wanted to know the costs of the type of work you do, where it is theopraxis, where it is connected to the ground, where it's not a disconnect there. So the cost, but then also the joys in your work, if you've always seen yourself even doing this type of work. And so I would love to hear from both of you on those questions.
So in part, the costs are hard to measure because there's so many variables, right? If your life could have taken this direction or that direction. But in many circles, those who do any kind of work that tries to pursue the heart of God is not very popular these days. And so I'm sitting last night at a dinner, a fundraiser, and I sit next to someone who works with at Merrill Lynch, and he's bragging about all the things that are happening in his world. And the other one that works for Novo Nordisk, the big pharmaceutical, and what's happening in her world, etc. And so the table went around like that, all sharing, and their measures of what success looks like,
Right.
and prestige. And so when you mention anything that has to do with minister or working with young people, then all of a sudden kind of the air starts coming out of the balloon, and it's like, oh, that's good that you do that, that we have good people like you. That's right. Give you the nice little pat on your back.
Right.
But that there's not significant value to it.
Right.
And I guess I'd be misleading you if I tell you that from time to time I have the thick skin and the self-confidence.
Yeah.
But sometimes you ask yourself, what if? What if I would have taken a different direction? Or why doesn't this have the same value that it should as it does to me?
Right.
So I think that's one of that's part of the price that you pay. And even within our own circles, because we're so attached also to the grassroots and on the ground, we don't have the luxury of spending as much time embedded in the textbooks, in the research, and all the reading and the writing as much as we could. And we're never there. We don't have that luxury.
And
so
it's more than luxury, it's pleasure, isn't it?
It is.
Right.
That's correct.
It's pleasure. That's
right. And you desire it. But because you're not there, you're looked down upon. So those are two of the quick ones. And then a quick value to all of that. And I think a part of it is the significance of the work that you do.
Yeah.
For the Merrill Lynch guy, it's that bonus in December, right? For us, it may be out of those 10 lepers, that one that comes back
Yeah.
and says thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That one that says thank God. 4 days ago, we buried a young man that was 28 years old from the same neighborhood, the church where I pastored it. And the family reached out to me. And here I am 8 years later after turning over the pastorship. And that to me was worth it. I know it doesn't sound like something very exciting, but to say, we want you to share his last moments with us. I could be walking down the neighborhood and someone walks by and says, hey, Pastor, you remember when we did this and when we did that? Thank you so much. You helped save my mom. You helped save my son. There's no price tag to that. There's no prestige to that. But it gets you up in the morning. At whatever time it is, like today, what is it, 6:45, 5:45 in the morning, to continue sharing this good news.
There's a wear and tear
to entering into these places on an ongoing basis. Entering them with empathy, with compassion, entering them from places of solidarity. There's a wear and tear. This is not romance. This is not the solidarity that you just write about so you could get your tenure, right?
Right.
This is a very costly piece, personally. I'm just going to be very real, and I'm going to use language that some people might think is inappropriate, but it is appropriate because there's no other word to talk about what is this stuff, right? So I call it the theology of shit. I'm a practical theologian.
You didn't say grit this time, right?
No, I didn't say grit. So I think he's a little taken by it too. But it is because you're touching the shit of life every day. The stuff that comes down the sewer empties out in these places. Nobody else wants it, so they empty it out over here.
Yeah.
Right? These are the forgotten places. So there really is no better word for it.
Yeah.
And you're dealing with the shit of this stuff, of people's lives, of why that's there every day. And if you do that every day, it infects you.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
This stuff has things in it that will affect you. You become terribly wounded by it. The depression of others can become yours as well on certain moments. Or their anxiety or their fears, they're real, they can become yours. You can be touching the grief, and then you go home and all of a sudden you have to turn your car to the side on the highway so you could just sit there and heave and cry. And you're like, why am I, crying like this? And it's because you just touched all this grief today. This story, that story, the other. You're a human being, right? And so you have to have a spirituality that allows you to bring that to God, to fight with God, to ask God deeper questions, right? Whatever it is, but that's where your belief has to kick in as well, and your faith gets stretched because you are touching all this stuff, right? And after a while you realize and you say, why all this shit? What's it good for? What can I do with all this shit? Because it's not going to stop coming. And I actually sat down and started looking up everything that you could do with shit. Right? It's a very different research project. Because I had to find hope from it. And I realized, the many benefits of manure. And the fact that you can't plant seeds without manure. So it's a great place for the seeds of the gospel. But it is difficult, and you become infected by it, and you need a spirituality that gets you through it, and you can't do this alone. This is not Lone Ranger time. Put it away if that's what you think it's about to be. You don't even try coming there. This has to be collaborative.
Yeah.
It has to be collaborative. I have to have somebody I could talk to and cry with, and we have to have people who are going to pray with us. And if you don't have a prayer life, don't even go there.
Yeah.
And it's not ping pong prayers. It's not, the prayers that you say at liturgy. It's not liturgical prayers. It's, it's the real prayers that are going to deal with that. Just one quick piece. I had a young lady, 23 years old. She went missing. And we're calling her, we call our students, right? We don't want them to go MIA on us. And I said, was she depressed? I start asking her about, no, she was fine. She was doing great. What happened? And who does she hang out with? And I start, speaking to the students. And one student says, can I just talk with you? And she wanted to come in the office, and we did. And she goes, she went missing, and we're putting up pictures of her in the neighborhood. I said, well, then put up pictures here too. This is part of the neighborhood. And it was an ongoing investigation. This young lady almost made it her purpose in life to keep trying to find her friend. Mm. After over a year, we found, the investigators found a leg. Mm. It came up in the Atlantic River, ocean. And the young lady found out, the investigator called her, she was in class. They brought her to my office because she was hysterical crying, and I was hysterical crying with her. I said, well, she was like, what do we do? I said, let's just sit here and cry with one another. And we were hysterical crying because that should not happen to a 23-year-old who's got a 3-year-old daughter. Right? So she was probably trafficked. She resisted. That's part of what takes place. Mm-hmm. People come to pillage in these areas because they're areas that we don't give value to. Politicians don't give value to these areas. That's why they are the way they are. And if you're going to be there, it's like Rubén said, there's no prestige to this. You're in the forgotten land of the forgotten people. And you don't romanticize the poor. It's hard work. Mm-hmm. It's arduous work. It's arduous work. There are days that I say to myself, I am too old to be disrespected this way. Mm. Just because someone, went through something and they decided to bring their attitude to me. But on a good day, I realize that they come with that attitude because they trust me. Mm-hmm. Right. They know I can hold it and hold them and bring them to another level. They know that I'm tough enough to confront them and bring them to another level. They know that that's the love that is present to them in the place. Mm. But it's arduous work. You need a spirituality that's going to hold you through it. Mm. And then you also need to know and not feel guilty about it when it's time for you to let it go, because otherwise you can herniate yourself. Mm. And it's time for you, the Lord knows, and the Lord calls you, and you'll be called to do something different. Rubén was in the ministry. You've been 8 years out, but you're doing something different in the same place, and sometimes shifting around that way, looking at some of the same things, but from a different angle, right? Gives you a breather in a different way. I don't know if you felt that way, right? And you have to know when that's okay too, right? Because you're not there to be a hero. Mm-hmm. So you have to know when that's okay too, because you could build your identity on that and then not know who you are outside of that. We have a mission, and that mission is done from a lot of different places, right?